My name is Amelia Reed. I'm 48 years old, and on the 3rd of February 2025, I died in my backyard shed. I was gone for 11 minutes.
What I'm about to tell you didn't just change everything I thought I knew about life and death. It shattered the foundations of my reality and rebuilt it with a terrifying, breathtaking truth about what's really happening in America right now. I have to share this story, even though part of me knows some people won't believe it. But I saw what I saw, and the silence I've kept is a heavy, suffocating thing. It's time to speak. I'm a Marine veteran. I did 3 tours, 2 in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. I've been out for 12 years, and for most of that time, I've worked construction, mostly roofing here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's good, honest work with a good crew. I'm married to my high school sweetheart, James. We've been together for 26 years. We have 3 kids, our son Lucas, who's 24 and works with me, our daughter Alara, who's 21 and in nursing school, and our youngest Cody, who just turned 18 and is headed to trade school in the fall. I've always been a believer, but if I'm honest, the last few years tested my faith pretty hard. Between the COVID lockdowns, the constant fight to keep work, watching our country tear itself apart, and dealing with the constant, throbbing aches in my joints from my time overseas, I started to wonder if God was even paying attention. I kept praying, but sometimes it felt less like a conversation and more like shouting into a storm. That Monday morning started like any other. James had left for work early, and the kids were getting ready for their day. I was in my shed, trying to organize tools for a big job we had starting that week. James had been on my case for weeks, saying the shed looked like a tornado hit it. It was true, there was a mountain of old paint cans, rusted tools, and forgotten boxes. I was trying to move one of the heavier ones, a box of old army gear I hadn't looked at in a decade, when this crushing pain hit my chest. It wasn't a sharp pain, but a deep, bone-grinding pressure, like someone had dropped a concrete block on my sternum. The air was sucked out of my lungs. I tried to call out for help, to scream, to just breathe, but nothing came. I fell backward, my head cracking against the workbench as I went down. My hands fumbled for something to hold on to, but there was nothing. The world tilted and went black. The last thing I heard was the rattling of my old workbench and the soft thud of a rusted wrench hitting the concrete floor. The blackness wasn't what I expected. It wasn't the peaceful nothingness I'd imagined, but a violent, sudden void, a tear in the fabric of my reality. Then, just as abruptly, I wasn't in the shed anymore. The crushing weight on my chest, the cold concrete floor, the smell of sawdust and old motor oil, it was all gone. I was floating. The first thing I registered was the silence. Not the absence of sound, but a profound, resonant quiet that filled every part of me. Below me, I could see the shed, its rusty roof glistening in the weak morning sun. Inside, I could make out the clutter, the workbench I had hit, and a figure lying motionless among the scattered tools. It was my body. The sight was surreal and detached, like watching a scene from a movie where the main character had just died, and I was merely a spectator. I could see James through the kitchen window, humming as he made breakfast, completely unaware of the cataclysm that had just taken place in our backyard. The smell of frying bacon wafted through the morning air, a cruel, mundane detail that stood in stark contrast to the profound moment I was experiencing. I wanted to scream, to call out to him and tell him that I was okay, that I was right here, but I couldn't make a sound. I had no mouth, no lungs, no throat to form the words. I was pure consciousness, a point of view without a body. Then I began to rise. The shed got smaller, then our whole house, our street, our neighborhood, all of Tulsa, and then the entire state of Oklahoma disappeared below me in a blur. The rising wasn't a panic descent. It was a gentle, effortless drift, as though I were a dandelion seed on the wind. I was moving through what looked like golden light mixed with the softest, most luminous clouds I had ever seen. The light wasn't blinding, it was warm and it permeated me, filling the empty spaces where my pain and anger used to reside. The worry, the exhaustion, the bitterness about politics, the aches in my body from years of war and work, all of it just vanished. I felt a peace so complete, so absolute, that it was impossible to comprehend. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a stillness that was more alive than any noise. The light pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, and I knew I was moving towards something or someone. And then he was there. I knew it was Jesus before he even spoke. Not from a feeling of religious duty or a learned belief, but from a profound, undeniable sense of recognition, a homecoming I never knew I was walking toward. He didn't look like the gentle, fair-skinned man in the paintings I'd grown up with. He was taller, broader, with a quiet strength that emanated from him. His skin was the color of rich earth, and his hair was black and wavy, pulled back from a face that held a timeless wisdom. But his eyes, those eyes were what held me. They weren't just eyes, they were windows into a universe of love, a love so vast and profound that it made every other love I had ever known feel like a pale shadow. When he looked at me, I felt a piercing sensation, not of judgment, but of complete and total recognition. He saw every part of me, the pride, the fear, the fatigue, the anger I'd been carrying like a heavy pack for years. He saw the doubt that had crept into my heart, the moments I'd questioned his existence. And somehow that didn't scare me. It made me feel seen, safe, and entirely loved. Amelia, he said, and his voice was like nothing I'd ever heard. It was both a powerful rumble and a gentle whisper, a sound that resonated deep in my soul, like a father talking to his child. My faithful warrior. I couldn't hold back the tears. I'm a veteran, a woman who's seen war and carried the weight of a family. I don't cry much, but standing there in front of him, all the walls I'd built to protect myself from the world and from my own pain came crashing down. The exhaustion I had been fighting for years finally overwhelmed me, and the tears streamed down my face. Jesus, I'm so sorry, I choked out, my voice cracking with emotion. I've been so angry lately, so tired. I feel like I've let you down. I've questioned everything. He smiled, and the light from his eyes seemed to grow brighter. He placed his hand on my chest, right where the crushing pain had been only moments ago. Instantly, I felt whole. The ache in my joints from the old injuries, the weight of the bitterness I had carried, it was all gone, replaced by a feeling of profound completeness. You have fought well, my daughter, he said. Your heart has always belonged to me, even when you couldn't feel my presence. Even in your anger, you were still searching for me. Am I dead? I asked, the question feeling both urgent and irrelevant in this place of peace. Your body is dying, he said. But you are more alive now than you have ever been. I brought you here because I need to show you something. Something about your country that you've been praying about. It was true. Every night for months, I'd been praying for America. Praying for healing, for unity, for God to help us find our way back to Him. The division was eating me alive. I had friends who wouldn't even talk to each other anymore because of politics. The chasm was growing and my prayers felt powerless. Now, standing here, I knew those prayers had not been silent cries into an empty room after all. He gestured with his hand, and suddenly the serene, golden light we were bathed in shifted. We weren't floating anymore, but standing on what felt like the peak of an impossibly high mountain. Below us, spread out like a giant living map, was all of America. I could see the vast expanse of the country, from the sun-drenched coast of California to the jagged, stormy shores of New England. I could see people in their homes, in their cars, at work, in grocery stores, and in churches. It was more than just sight. Somehow I could sense their hearts. I felt the collective hope and despair, the simmering anger, the quiet fears, and the fervent prayers of millions of people all at once. It was an overwhelming symphony of human emotion that made the political arguments I had engaged in seem small and petty. Amelia, you've been asking me what's going to happen, Jesus said, his voice cutting through the silent roar of the nation's heart. You've been asking what this new era of leadership will bring. I'm going to show you, but you must understand. What you see is not inevitable. It's what will happen if my people do not wake up. If they do not pray like never before, if they do not choose me over their own pride, this is the path they will walk. He pointed toward Washington, D.C., and the scene below us came alive in a way that was both horrifying and profoundly detailed. I could see the city laid out like a chessboard, with buildings and monuments that I had only ever seen on television. The view zoomed in, and I saw the president in the Oval Office. He looked older, more burdened, and more tired than I had ever seen him. The weight of the world seemed to sit on his shoulders like a physical thing. Around him were his advisors and staff, and as I watched, I could somehow sense the spiritual forces around each person. Some radiated a brilliant light, like small, flickering stars. Others carried deep, unsettling shadows, twisting and coiling like smoke. It was a shocking, visceral realization that the political decisions that affected millions were not just made by men and women, but were influenced by an unseen, constant battle for their souls. The invisible war raged around the president. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a reality I could feel, a terrifying, silent maelstrom of spiritual energy. The angels around some of his advisors were like sentinels, their presence a palpable force of light and peace, while the shadows around others hissed and whispered, twisting their words into something bitter and self-serving. It was like watching a chessboard where every move was influenced by forces a million times more powerful than the players. The next 4 years will be unlike anything America has ever experienced, Jesus said, his voice grave. The enemy knows his time is short. He is like a caged beast, and in his final desperation, he will use every tool at his disposal to destroy this nation from within. The vision shifted again, and the beautiful, sweeping view of the country below was replaced with a series of quick, gut-wrenching scenes. I saw cities on fire, not just from riots but from a deeper, more profound anger that had taken root in people's hearts. I saw neighbors turning against neighbors over political signs, friendships of a lifetime dissolving in an instant of rage. The scene that pierced me most deeply was of the churches. I saw congregations split right down the middle, with Christians more concerned about being right than about being loving. It was a schism that was far more devastating than any political divide. I saw families destroyed, not by outside forces, but by their own anger and pride, a slow burn destruction of the very foundation of society. Lord, this is horrible, I whispered, my voice trembling with fear and grief. It was an image of America tearing itself apart from the inside, and it felt so real, so plausible, that I wanted to close my eyes and make it all go away. But Jesus didn't let me. Yes, he said, his voice full of sorrow. But watch what happens next. Then the sign changed completely. The fiery chaos and bitter division faded away, replaced by a new vision that was softer, more hopeful. I saw people on their knees, not just in churches, but in living rooms, in fields, and even in their cars, crying out to God. It was a humble, desperate, and unified prayer that seemed to rise up like a beautiful fragrance to the heavens. The sound of their prayers was a powerful, melodic hum that drowned out the noise of the political arguments. I saw Christians laying down their political signs, their angry posts, and their pride, and instead picking up food for the hungry, caring for the sick, and opening their homes to the homeless. I saw pastors preaching love and grace instead of politics and anger, their pulpits no longer a battleground but a place of healing. I saw revival breaking out in the most broken places, in forgotten small towns and inner-city neighborhoods, a quiet but powerful fire of faith that was spreading from heart to heart. You see, Amelia, Jesus said, his voice now full of hope. Crisis reveals character. When everything shakes, people discover what they are really standing on. The question is, will my people stand on politics, on a party, on a man, or will they stand on me? He showed me the president again, and this time the spiritual battle around him was even more clear. The angels and demons still there, still fighting for influence, but the atmosphere had changed. The prayers I had just witnessed were acting as a spiritual shield, a powerful force of light that was pushing back the shadows. I watched as the spiritual atmosphere around him shifted based on whether people were praying for him or cursing him. It was a tangible, visible demonstration of the power of intercession. Every prayer was a ray of light, and every curse was a drop of darkness. And the combined prayers of millions of people created a sun that burned away the shadows. I watched mesmerized as the spiritual atmosphere around the president became a living barometer of the nation's prayers. It was a staggering revelation. The decisions he made didn't happen in a vacuum. They were a direct result of the voices he heard most clearly, and those voices, I now understood, were amplified by the prayers of the righteous. It was a tangible, visible demonstration of a spiritual law I had only ever read about in books. Intercession wasn't just a suggestion, it was a critical, strategic act of war. I watched as some of his decisions, bathed in the light of fervent prayer, brought about unexpected moments of unity and healing. Other choices, however, made in a moment of spiritual vulnerability and a lack of prayerful support, created deeper, more painful divisions. It was a brutal lesson in cause and effect, where the prayers of the people were the variable that determined the outcome. What about the people who hate him? I asked, the words forming with a new sense of urgency. The ones who are cursing him, who want to see him fail. Jesus looked at me with such profound compassion that my heart ached. Love your enemies, Amelia. Pray for those who persecute you. This isn't just a nice suggestion for a Sunday morning sermon. It's a spiritual law. Hatred only feeds the darkness. Cursing a leader, even when you disagree with, is like pouring gasoline on a fire you are desperate to put out. It binds you to the very darkness you are fighting against. He showed me a different vision now, and it was one that broke my heart more than anything I had seen before. The vision shifted, and the focus was no longer on the political sphere, but on the digital and spiritual landscape of the church itself. I saw Christians on social media, fighting with each other over memes and news articles, calling each other names and spreading gossip and lies. The anger was so palpable it felt like an acid bath, corroding the very fabric of community. I saw pastors who were more interested in their podcast numbers, their book deals, and their political influence than in the souls of their people. Their sermons were more like political rallies than messages of hope and grace. I saw believers treating politics like it was their religion, and their religion like it was just another political party to join. This grieves me more than the attacks from unbelievers, Jesus said, and I could hear the profound pain in his voice. When my people fight each other, when they show no love to one another, the world sees no difference between them and everyone else. How can they believe the gospel of love when those who preach it show no love? The division among my own is a poison that is killing the testimony of my church. It was a truth that cut me to the quick because I knew I had been part of that problem. I had allowed my own political anger to sour my heart and my interactions. I had judged my fellow believers who saw things differently than I did, and in doing so, I had become a part of the spiritual darkness I was so desperate to fight against. But then he showed me something beautiful, something that pulled me from the depths of that conviction and filled me with a new sense of purpose. The vision of a fractured, angry church dissolved, replaced by a scene that felt deeply, intimately personal. I saw my own children, but they were older, their faces lined with the quiet wisdom that comes from a life of service. My son Lucas was no longer working with me on a roofing crew. He was leading a team of volunteers, his hands strong and sure as he hammered nails into the frame of a house. I sensed that this home was for a veteran, a former soldier who had fallen on hard times. His face was filled with a quiet satisfaction, a joy that came not from a paycheck but from an act of selfless giving. My daughter, Alara, was a nurse, her hands gentle as she tended to a patient in a free clinic. She wasn't just healing bodies. I could feel that she was offering a quiet word of encouragement, a prayer for their soul. My youngest, Cody, was working with a group of troubled teens, not lecturing them but mentoring them, his arm around a young boy who looked lost and angry. They weren't perfect, I knew, but they were choosing love over hate, service over selfishness. Jesus turned to me, his smile full of pride and tenderness. Your prayers for your children have created a hedge of protection around them, Amelia. The seeds of faith you've planted will grow, but you must return to continue nurturing them. The word return hit me like a physical blow. The thought of leaving this place, this profound, all-encompassing peace, felt impossible. The weight of the world, the anger, the division, the endless struggle. It all came rushing back in a tidal wave of dread. Jesus, I don't want to go back, I pleaded, the tears I had cried earlier returning with renewed force. Everything is so broken down there. So angry. Can't I just stay here with you? He put his hands on my shoulders, and I felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated tenderness pass through me. I know, my daughters. I know how heavy the world feels. But your mission isn't complete. Your family needs you. Your country needs your prayers. And there are people you haven't met yet who need to hear this message, who need to see the hope that I have placed inside you. The idea of going back to the pain, the division, the endless struggle was an overwhelming weight on my soul. My heart felt torn in two, one half longed to stay in this perfect peace, and the other half was filled with the profound sense of purpose he had just shown me. I began to cry again, not from sorrow, but from the sheer magnitude of it all. Will you be with me always? I asked, a child's question escaping my lips. When you feel alone, remember this moment, he said, his gaze unwavering. When you're tempted to give in to anger or despair, remember my love. And when you wonder if your prayers matter, remember what you've seen here. Remember the power you hold. He showed me one final vision, and it was the most personal and compelling of all. The final vision was a quiet, intimate scene. I saw myself, but it wasn't the Amelia I knew. This woman was older, her face softened by compassion, and she was talking to a young construction worker. He was angry, his face a mask of bitterness and cynicism. His posture was defensive, his arms crossed over his chest, his eyes filled with a raw, festering rage that I recognized all too well. I watched as I shared my story with him, the words flowing with a peace that was completely foreign to my former self. I could see the initial skepticism on his face, the way his eyes rolled at the mention of faith. But as I spoke, as the power of my experience filled the space between us, I saw his defenses begin to crumble. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of curiosity, then a quiet, profound hope. The vision then jumped forward, and I saw that same young man years later. He wasn't on a construction site anymore. He was standing in front of a massive crowd, a microphone in his hand, his face radiating a joy that seemed to fill the stadium. He was leading a ministry that had brought thousands to faith, his story a testament to the power of a single moment of grace. One conversation, Amelia, Jesus said, his voice full of solemn wonder. One moment of obedience. One choice to love instead of hate. Do you see the eternal impact? Do you see how your life, one moment at a time, can create a ripple that changes generations? I did see. I saw how every prayer, every act of kindness, every choice to love instead of hate created waves that rippled through time. My anger, my bitterness, my own personal struggles had felt so big, so all-encompassing. But here, in the light of this vision, I saw that they were just drops in a vast ocean. And my choice to love, my choice to pray, that was a force that could change the very tides of history. What should I tell people about what's coming? I asked, the question ringing with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim of circumstances, but a messenger, a warrior with a mission. Tell them the truth, Jesus said, his voice a powerful, resonant chord. Hard times are ahead, but I am still on the throne. Tell them to pray for their leaders, all of them, not for political victory, but for wisdom and righteousness. Tell them to love their neighbors, especially the ones they disagree with. Tell them that America's future doesn't depend on any president, but on the hearts of my people. He paused, his eyes looking directly into mine, and I felt the weight of his final words. And tell them I'm coming back soon. The signs are everywhere. They need to be ready. The feeling of peace that had held me so completely began to wane, and I felt a gentle but firm pull, drawing me away from him. It was a terrifying sensation, like being pulled back into the icy depths of a cold ocean after basking in the sun. I'm not ready to leave you, Lord, I cried out, a profound sadness overwhelming me. I don't want to go back to all of that. You're not leaving me, he said, his voice now a warm whisper that wrapped around my soul. I live in you. Every time you choose love over hate, every time you pray instead of worry, every time you serve instead of complain, that's me working through you. His form began to fade, the golden light around him becoming a brilliant, blinding white. The perfect, all encompassing peace gave way to a rushing, chaotic sensation, and everything faded to black once more. The sound and fury of the world came rushing back in a deafening tidal wave. I woke up on the cold, concrete floor of my shed. The smell of sawdust and stale motor oil filled my nostrils, and the sharp pain in my head where I'd hit the workbench was a searing, brutal reminder of reality. My body was an anchor, a heavy, painful shell I had been violently forced back into. I heard the sound of my husband, James, shouting my name, his voice laced with a panicked desperation I had never heard before. He was shaking me, his hands on my shoulders, his face a blur of terror and relief. The sounds of a distant siren grew louder, a wailing, insistent cry that seemed to be screaming back the chaos of the world. Paramedics were suddenly there, their movements a frantic ballet of organized chaos. I saw the flash of an oxygen mask being placed over my face, heard the beeping of machines, and felt the sharp jab of an IV in my arm. They were talking over me, around me, their voices a muffled roar. I was clinically dead for 11 minutes. I heard one of them say it. 11 minutes. In that time, I had seen the future, felt a love beyond words, and stood on a mountain overlooking a nation's soul. The ride to the hospital was a blur of flashing lights and disjointed memories. My mind was still in two places at once. Part of me was still bathed in the golden light, and the other part was trapped in a body that was just beginning to remember how to live. I remember the weight of the bitterness I had been carrying was gone. The anger I had felt toward politicians, the frustration over how divided everything was, it was all replaced with something else. Hope and a burning, relentless desire to pray. The doctors couldn't explain what happened. They ran every test imaginable, but the results were a medical anomaly. My heart was not just healthy, it was stronger than it had been in years. All my vital signs were perfect, as if I had never had a heart attack at all. They kept me overnight for observation, but every doctor and nurse who came into my room left with a look of quiet disbelief. They called it a miracle. That evening, my family gathered around my hospital bed. James was still shaking, his hand clutching mine as if afraid I would disappear again. The kids were quiet, their faces pale and scared. They had come so close to losing me, and the shock was still etched on their faces. I looked at each of them and told them I loved them, not in the casual way I had before, but with a fierce, profound love that felt new and overwhelming. Then I told them everything. At first, they thought the lack of oxygen had affected my brain. James tried to rationalize it, to find a medical explanation for what I was saying. The kids listened with a quiet, polite skepticism. But as I shared more details, the specific color of the golden light, the profound love in Jesus' eyes, the sorrow he felt over the division, as they saw the raw, emotional change in me, the anger and bitterness gone from my voice, they began to believe. My daughter, Alara, said later that it was my eyes that convinced her. She said they looked like they had seen something incredible, something that had cleansed the fear and exhaustion from their depths. That was 4 months ago. Everything in my life is different now. The woman who walked into that shed that morning was tired, bitter, and angry. The woman who walked out of the hospital was filled with a peace that defies all logic. I still do construction, but my purpose has shifted. Now I pray with the guys on the job site who are going through tough times, sharing a quick word of encouragement or a quiet prayer before we start the day. I started a Bible study for veterans at our church, a small group of broken warriors trying to find their way home. And I pray for our country every single morning before I even get out of bed, a prayer not of anger, but of intercession. I watch the news differently now, too. Instead of getting mad at politicians, I find myself praying for them, for the spiritual forces around them. Instead of arguing with people on social media, I've deleted the app. I spend that time in prayer because I've seen the spiritual battle that's really happening. I've seen with my own eyes how much our prayers actually matter, how they ripple through the universe and influence the spiritual atmosphere around us. People ask me if I'm worried about the next 4 years. Yes, I am. Some of what Jesus showed me was hard to watch. But I am not hopeless because I also saw what happens when God's people really pray. When they really love. When they really live like Jesus. I think about that young construction worker Jesus showed me, the one I'm supposed to reach. I don't know who he is yet, but I'm watching for him. Maybe he's on my crew. Maybe he's someone I'll meet at the hardware store. Maybe, just maybe, he's someone listening to this story right now. If you're wondering whether God really hears your prayers, let me tell you something from a place of absolute certainty. He does. I saw it with my own eyes. Every single prayer you utter, no matter how small or insignificant it feels, creates ripples in the spiritual realm that go farther than you can ever imagine. Every time you choose love over hate, every time you choose to speak a kind word instead of a bitter one, you're not just being a good person. You are actively pushing back the darkness that is trying to consume our country. Jesus is real. Heaven is real. And he is coming back sooner than we think. The question isn't whether difficult times are coming, they are. I saw a future that will test the very foundations of our nation and our faith. The question is, how are you going to respond? Are you going to spend your energy fighting about politics, or are you going to spend it praying for our leaders? Are you going to waste your time hatting people who disagree with you, or are you going to love them and show them a better way? Are you going to live in fear, or are you going to live in faith? I've seen what's possible when believers really pray. I've seen the miracles that happen when we choose unity over division. I've seen the revival that's ready to break out if we'll just humble ourselves and seek God's face. The choice is ours, but we need to choose quickly. Time is running out. My name is Amelia Reed. I died for 11 minutes, and Jesus showed me what's really at stake. The future isn't about Republican or Democrat. It's not about which politician is in office or which law gets passed. It's about whether God's people will be the light in the darkness or get swallowed up by it. The question is not what happens next in our country. The question is, which will you choose?